Hope so. That'll be, if they didn't
Okay.
ask, then they're gonna be there.
We're live, April 1st.
No, it's Amy, okay.
April 1st, School's Day. And we are going to talk about the House's budget proposal, H493.
Do you want me to share my screen?
I think that's sometimes helpful.
Yeah.
Most of the time. I don't see a downside unless it's distracting to you as a person.
I mean, assuming I open everything, I actually am on a already spreadsheet, I'm sure.
But all your documents are on our website.
All on the website, and I'm gonna hand them out as I go through them, so you don't get distressed, we don't get confused about which one we're talking
I guess
about.
I don't need this anymore, because there's a new one. I don't think I took it off.
Oh, yeah, I can.
Okay, just make sure. Yeah, which one are you gonna start with, Emily?
We are gonna start with changes to the FY 2025 budget.
There's not one that's titled.
C-section changes. Or section C.
Yes. Makes sense. What was the committee vote was 11-0. Do you know what the House vote was?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Anybody?
It was
C-section, sounds like it belongs in that committee.
Yeah.
All right.
C-section.
You can have it.
Fixed it. Okay, so for the record, Emily Byrne, from Joint Fiscal Office. We're gonna walk through the 2026 budget as passed by the House, but to start with that, we need to start with the changes that were made to the FY 2025 budget, because that's the sort of the jumping off point for the FY 26 budget. So in front of you, I just handed out a spreadsheet, and what's up online is the C-section changes of the big bill is in H493 as passed by the House. So at the top of this, this assumes the budget adjustment H489 as passed by the House and is now being contemplated by the Senate as a sort of starting place for the appropriations in FY 25. So based on
assuming that passes.
Assuming that passes, right? So that budget adjustment assumed that there would be about $133.5 million left on the bottom line in FY 25. So in the House added to that if you'll recall, this is the follow the bouncing ball of the treasurer's money.
Yeah.
So there was $20 million appropriated to the treasurer's office a couple of years ago for bond redemption. The emergency board was authorized, redirected $14 million of that money to the BGAP program and a mobile home replacement program. Also directed the Commissioner of Finance and Management to put $14 million back into that appropriation in the Budget Adjustment Act. This second version of the Budget Adjustment Act does that. It puts an additional $14 million aside for bond redemption. There's also $6 million sitting in the original appropriation that was not touched by the emergency board. That's available. The House amended the budget adjustment to reduce the appropriation to the treasurer's office by $10 million. So what the language in the budget bill does is leaves $4 million in that appropriation to the treasurer's office for bond redemption, plus $6 million in the original appropriation is still available for its existing purposes. So
that's not on the sheet.
That's not on this sheet, no. So the story behind this $10 million line and the line 3 below it, the 0, is that of the $20 million, the $20 million got fully restored. The House took 10 of it. There's still $10 million there.
Isn't that the most appropriated money of the
In the
year?
world.
Pretty much.
We've appropriated.
Should get a bonus for being able to follow.
Follow the track around.
I could probably make a whole spreadsheet of in and out. Anyway. So the House added $10 million in terms of sources available to them in the FY 2025 budget.
Okay.
So then, how some of those funds got spent. So in the FY 2025 or 2026 governor's recommended budget, there were some additional changes to the existing budget. Some of those got wrapped into the budget adjustment, both versions of the budget adjustment. But the two pieces that remained outstanding were these changes in the current year related to requests for reclassification for the state police and the game wardens. So those additional costs need to get paid for it in 2025. And then there was this net neutral change, reducing the PGAP appropriation and putting additional money into VITA for the disaster relief fund.
Because those RFR increases, they started in 2020.
Correct.
We didn't know that in 2025.
Right, the RFRs, I think
2024.
they happened in the fall, and then I think both House and Senate, that came over in the governor's recommended budget, but decided to wait until the big bill to get more information and to hear more about it. So
Okay.
those are included as an FY 25 change. And then the next sections, it's labeled H141. So these were items that were in.
What about the VITA disaster relief fund taken from VGAP?
Yeah.
Did you already say it?
Yes, there is another one.
What did you say? Maybe I was thinking about the RFRs.
Sure. This was just another item that was in the governor's recommended budget that the House, or the budget, that the House agreed with, that I think they wanted more testimony on before putting it into the Budget Adjustment Act. So
And does it have to be in the C section or rather than the C section?
I think it's a current year change, which is why I
Okay.
can't speak to whether or not it has to be in the current year.
Okay.
That's what.
Doesn't seem like it has to be to me, but I don't know, maybe there's something.
Yeah, we can follow up on that one. Yeah.
Because the approach was to VGAP, and this is money that wasn't spent in VGAP programs, so that's why you need to put it here. But I guess you could just revert it back to the general fund and then appropriate it into one time.
Or you can just change the current year appropriation as proposed in section C.
Yeah, either one.
Either.
Okay, we have choices.
Correct. So, and then on line 11, it says H141, so that was the first version of the Budget Adjustment Act, and the line items below that are items that were included in the first version of the Budget Adjustment Act that were not included in the second version of the Budget Adjustment Act. But they include, so in the second version of the Budget Adjustment, there was a restoration of the originally proposed reversions from the judiciary. So in the first version, we got rid of the reversions and then redesignated the spending authority for 2 appropriations to the judiciary to do network security in the Essex courtroom bathroom.
That bathroom has gotten a lot of,
Almost.
I've
as
never
much
talked
as
more about a bathroom.
the treasurer's money. So then what happens in in H489, the second version of the Budget Adjustment Act, like I should have a whiteboard, but anyway. That money gets reverted but not reappropriated in the new budget adjustment. So now it's being reappropriated in the big bill in the FY 25 section.
I'm gonna be
Line 14 is the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board investments. In H141, this was about $8.6 million. They have not included that in FY 25. There is additional money for VHCB in their FY 2026 construct, but it is not included here. There is, I should say, the line 15, the Act 186 pilot project. That money is for VHCB. That was in the original BAA and is being appropriated so they can finish that housing project. The next 2 lines, 15.1 and 16, for the municipal grant program. So they've included the language that was in the original Budget Adjustment Act to move funds to municipalities impacted by the flooding events. And you may recall with Addison County, we sort of pull that money back and then reappropriate the 1.8 so that it is that Addison County folks that were impacted will get money from that new appropriation. So the total uses in FY 2025 equate to about $7.5 million, which leaves available going into 2026, $36.11 million. And that's one-time funds, right? Because it's year-end balance that is not anticipated to reoccur.
Okay.
Cool. All right.
C section.
That's section C, and then we can move on to base changes, where we'll go next. I don't really know one of the times so that we don't get.
That's a good idea. Now, does this change? I have a version of it.
It shouldn't have, no. So the spreadsheet that you have in front of you is a summary, sort of overview and a comparison between the governor's recommended FY26 budget and the House FY26 budget. And we'll just sort of start at the top and walk through. I don't know that it makes sense for me to walk through every single line item at this point, but I can do some of that if that makes sense. And then I know Rep. Shy will be in after me, and she can speak to some of the rationale around the decisions made by the House. But so at the very top, the governor and the House column are the same, and likely the Senate column will be the same when we'll add in a column for the Senate.
The House likes around one digit less.
Where?
On line number 1.
Yes, apparently. I can fix that. I don't know how that one happened. Anyway, it's the same number. So the base was sort of typical changes. So this is
2 cents.
Yeah.
salaries and benefits.
Is that where they put in their 2 cents?
Sure. I mean, it's $20,000 really, but
Yeah, because it's a million.
it's
Yeah,
millions.
Hey,
But in the terms of a $2 billion budget, $20,000
It's about 2
effectively
cents.
20 cents, 2 cents. So the first line 1, 26 base with typical changes. This is just like the regular work of government that we're sort of not changing. So salaries and benefit changes, internal service funds, sort of base Medicaid payments, sort of regular operating as usual. The line below that is the Pay Act appropriation for FY26, followed by the pension increases in line 3. So the 17 million only reflects the change from FY25 to FY26 in terms of pension costs. The sort of base pension costs would be in that line above. The total amount that we're paying on pensions is significantly higher than $17 million. So this is just that increase.
And this is the Pay Act. It's only every 2 years, only on even years. So this is
Correct.
Pay Act that passed in
In the 25, it was in the 2025 budget, this amount. So then the base transfers, I'll hand out a sheet later on that, but sort of the base transfers are transfers that we normally make. So the biggest one is the transfer to the debt service fund. That's about $81 million. And then the $14 million transfer to the cash fund, which the House actually reduced that transfer, but we'll talk about that sort of later on.
Do you have another sheet? Well, I just wondered if it was on here.
No, the supplemental sheet that's referred to is this one, which I'll hand that out later to keep us rolling. There's a transfer to the Tax Computer Modernization Fund, and there's a small transfer to the Fish and Wildlife Fund, sort of the base transfers at FY 2026. So from there, that gets us to our sort of starting point in terms of appropriations of $2.3 billion, $2.37 billion.
Wait, how can those be the same total?
Because the base sort of stuff didn't change between the governor and the House. But then if we go to the next part, this is all the stuff that's different.
No, understood, but the top one is a different number.
Well, it's just round.
It's rounded.
Okay,
I'll add the one more decimal point. It'll be the same number.
okay.
Or take the decimal point out.
Yeah, or round it the other way, but it's the same, underneath. So anyway, so those two, so no difference between Gov and House. And then the next bunch of lines are all of the changes, the differences between the governor and the House. And so the governor's column is right what is considered the sort of new stuff in the budget. And then same with the House. And the one in the difference column, if it's in gray, that means that the House agreed with the governor. And if there's a difference, that's where the House made changes. So I can quickly walk through some of them. But so they added an additional position in the Attorney General's office to help with the pre-charge program, which is on line 6. But they added additional funds there.
Is that just to complete the 3 months that's left in this fiscal year?
That's for next year, FY
This is next year's.
26.
So this is 120,000?
120,000 is a position, 120,000 for a position, and then 1.1 million for the pre-charge program. For pre-charge diversion.
And the position?
The administrators in the thing above,
In the one, oh, that is the.
Yeah.
1 point,
that's the position.
okay.
They reduced the amount of money going to the judiciary's technology fund. They have a reduction in the amount of fees that they're collecting.
That's their own, IT system.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I believe this was due to the adjustments that happened in the Budget Adjustment Act. They didn't need it as much in 26 because there was additional money added in 25. That's my understanding. They didn't change, so I'll just keep running down unless there's other questions.
I'm sorry, you said because there was money in the budget adjustment, but we didn't pass.
Correct, under the assumption that the budget adjustment passes at some point. So the starting place for all of this is the budget adjustment that is on the floor of the Senate tomorrow as the sort of jumping off. So in line 8 is where we have the security services COLA. For the judiciary, that was agreed to with the governor. The next 2 lines are removing vacancy savings at the secretary or state's attorney's and sheriff's office and adding an additional funding for transport deputies. That's the sheriff's.
Security services code is basically the deputies that they have for courtrooms.
Right.
They had some temporary positions that they wanted made permanent. Is that part of this?
I'm not sure. The judiciary or the state's attorney?
I think that was state's attorneys.
The state's attorneys, there's an extension of limited service positions in the language for an additional year.
I see.
As part of they got additional money, the positions were extended, and then they'll have to manage within the additional money that was provided, given the positions that they have. The JTOC transfer was agreed to by the House, so reducing the amount of transportation fund going to the state police and replacing it with general fund. Additionally, funding for radio equipment at the Department of Public Safety, the School Safety Center, cameras, firearm replacement, position, or this is a very small, it's only $5,000 for a hazard mitigation grants manager. They added an additional $500,000 to support emergency food purchases at emergency management. I believe this would be with the food bank, to ensure that when there's an emergency, there's our contract in place to allow the purchase of food and water quickly. In the Department of Military, there was a reduction of $100,000 to reflect what they actually anticipate spending on grants for returning veterans. So that money came out of the base.
So is that just a truing up and they had better numbers? Okay.
Yeah. The K-9 trainer at the Criminal Justice Training Council, this is a net number. So right now the K-9 trainer work is done through a contract. They would eliminate the contract expense and then add a position at the council, and the net increase of that is $40,000. They added an additional 112 for the conservation districts, so the Agency of Agriculture.
Emily, does it matter if it's from the pool or not? What do we care if it's from the position pool or not?
Sure. Ultimately, that's sort of the policy choice of either body in terms of whether or not you want to have new positions added to state government and the position count increased, or to keep the position count the same and have the executive branch reallocate positions with what has already been authorized by the General Assembly.
So they had $75,000 in this line item to get, and that they're asking for an additional 40?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there's no money, it just means you don't have to go through the process of creating a new position, but you're still creating a new position, but it's not
Correct.
Added to the total possible count.
Correct. The expert on all of this is in the court.
Right.
And I think that the language, and Amy, correct me if I get this wrong, the language in the big bill says, creates a new position, but then it has specific language that says shall be transferred and converted from a position in the pool.
you know how many, but I think you told me the pool is always, it's a very,
It's a shallow pool.
it's a shallow, but it's almost like a river, like it moves all the time. Like,
Yeah.
there are 2 this week, 12 next week. It's not just like a stable position around to be picked up.
Yes, there aren't hundreds of empty positions that are just sort of hanging out in stake-out.
Okay.
Okay, conservation districts, we did that. Additional funding for the Vermont Access Network.
So, they were looking for 1.35, so the House has only put in an additional,
50,000.
Because the 1.3 is in the base.
I believe so. I believe this was to get them, I can't remember, that's a good question for Rep. Shy.
well, it's $1 million in the base, and then they were looking to bump up to 1.35.
I think it was 1.3 in the base. To get to another 50.
No, that we needed to get to, but
We can take it to that one.
Yeah. so when we say the base,
Mhm.
I mean, last year it was $1 million added to the Secretary of State's budget.
Yeah, I guess.
And now they wanted 1.35. So what would, when you say there's 1.3 in the base, what do you mean?
Right, I think in the Secretary of State's budget, as presented, there was $1.3 million requested for the Vermont Access Network.
I see, so.
And this is an additional 50.
So elsewhere in the House's budget, they've given the 1.3.
Yes.
Okay.
And so to the extent that's sort of like base ongoing, that's captured in line 1. But there's no change presented by the governor. It's sort of, this is ongoing operations of state government.
So they're bringing it up to the full ask.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Okay.
So in line 19, we have 2 additional positions at the Human Rights Commission. These were in the Budget Adjustment Act. I think given the timing of the Budget Adjustment Act, it was determined to just wait until FY26 to add those positions. There's also language about those coming from the pool. Line 20, that's the global commitment match. That is just sort of the net impact of all of the global commitment stuff. That's the caseload and utilization changes. Not a lot of excitement in that number. I mean, there's a lot going on in that number, but not a lot to really talk about here.
It was $1 million last year. The governor put in 1.3. The House raised it to 1.35. But that's not what it shows on the sheet.
No, because the base amount is the same, I think. So maybe it should show an extra 300,000 from the governor.
Right.
But it's sort of, it's captured above, I guess. All right.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Similarly, thinking about like the conservation districts, they had been funded at, I think, $500,000, and this is just additional.
Correct.
Right, so that $500,000 is not, we're not seeing it there. This is just above what would normally, and that's true for all of these.
Yes.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
These are all one time.
These are all base. This is all, next year that we'll reset the base by this amount. Okay, so in line 21, this is a rate increase for FQHCs. And the general fund share, the state share is the 4.42, but there's a total global commitment appropriation of 10.71. So the difference will be federal funds there. This is a rate increase for the family planning EM code. This can be matched at 90/10. So it will be, it's $885,000, which rounds to looks like 90,000 on this spreadsheet, but $85,000 can draw down $850,000 in global commitment. For that line, line 23, the match for home and community-based services based on the rate study. So this is increasing some home and community-based services rates. The total investment will be $6.78 million of global commitment funds. That will be in the Dale long-term care appropriation. They did a 2% rate increase for global commitment for community providers, so DAs, SSAs, et cetera. And those individual appropriations are kind of spread across the Agency of Human Services. if you look through the web report and the changes there, but that will draw down $12.14 million of total funds across AHS for those rate increases. The 211 contract, to make it a 24/7 service, that's also eligible for global commitment match. So in total, that will increase $332,000.
Didn't we do that last year, make it a
We
24
did
hour?
it 2 years ago.
Correct. It was a one-time appropriation last year, so this puts it into the base.
It was 200,000, I thought, the last time we did it.
Maybe because it's, yeah, I don't remember if we talked about it eligible for global commitment last time.
Right, I don't know,
They
that
already know
might be
that.
new information.
And the difference between community-based service providers and community providers, the same thing?
Yeah, so the home and community-based service, no, I'm gonna get a little bit on my lane, but home and community-based services are specific, I think are specific types of services, and then the providers are their rates for those
But
providers.
they were, I'm guessing both were part of that rate study.
No, I think the rates, no, I got Nolan here, maybe to chime in, but
The rate study focused more on choices for care providers.
and it's not every service provided by home and community-based. It was the rate study demonstrated that there were certain services that were under reimbursed, I believe, so it only moves certain services based on that study.
And did we do part of that last year and the rest of it this year? Or
I don't believe so.
No, I think we did the study last, no, they 2 years ago, I don't think we raised.
So I thought we did
I
raise,
don't think we raised.
did we raise the community provider rate
Yes,
increase last year?
yeah.
Yeah.
We did the TAs and the SSAs.
We did a 3% increase.
Yeah, across everybody, all the communities, PAs and SSAs.
Oh, and this is an additional 2% this year. Okay.
All right, in line 26, the recovery campus, the House did not move forward with the governor's proposed pilot for the recovery campus. I believe that was in a correctional facility, but I can't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Is that still in the public safety bill?
I don't know.
We haven't seen a public safety in here.
We haven't seen it, but I mean, it would be in judiciary. I think it's part of the bigger.
We haven't seen something with a.
You haven't?
This was in
So
the
it's
government-
only in the budget.
This is in the gov rag.
Yeah.
If there's money in a bill somewhere else, I'm unaware of it.
Okay, thanks.
Weston, did you?
Isn't this the money that goes to corrections, but it goes out into the community, and when they leave corrections and they end out in the community, this is
Transition.
housing piece,
Transitional program,
yeah.
yeah.
Well,
Isn't that
we can
the-
ask Robin Shaw.
You guys know where it's another question for the health department, I believe it, or, yeah. I think it's in the health department and substance use programs.
That's what I thought.
Okay, so the next line 27, the House agreed with the increase in the funding for re-engagement beds for withdrawal management that the governor proposed. They did not agree with the increase in the additional funding for the aftercare navigators. I believe that is, it's also related to substance use programs, and the thought was that the opioid settlement advisory group should look at that as a possible place to invest opioid settlement funds.
So waiting a whole year before it happens? Was that
I don't know if it's waiting a whole year.
well, because the opioid settlement committee won't meet until the summer or fall to make that decision.
Again, what the House did was there's a separate bill,
Right.
218, that settlement money is in a separate bill. And so I think the decision was that should be thought of in the context of that fund and not this. And it wasn't, so in their recommendations, 218 are all from the opioid advisory committee for this year.
Did the opioid advisory committee recommend this? I forgot.
No, no.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so on line 30, the Department of Mental Health, the governor had recommended eliminating the Howard Center Community Center outreach program, so it was a negative a reduction in the governor's budget and the House added it back in. So it's a zero in the House because it kind of goes back to the zero position. Same with the embedded clinicians at the pediatric offices. The governor had reduced that by $269,000. The House added back $249,000. So they didn't fully add back the reduction, they added back most of the reduction there. They agreed with the governor on the CCFAP caseload savings amount based on the consensus projections that JFO did with DCF in the fall in terms of utilization of the new child care program. And then this was similar to what was in the budget adjustment, but there was a shift of, there's a projected increase in the available funds in the child care special fund. So this is shifting general fund expenses to the child care special fund is the $19 million change proposed by the governor. The House reduced that and proposed to do a rate increase for infant and toddlers of 4.5%. So
I'm very confused.
Yep. So it's effectively, they need more because they've increased the infant and toddler rate. They need to keep that, the cost of the whole program will go up, which means they can't shift as much off the general fund to the special fund. So they have to leave the general fund amount that's equivalent to the 4.5% rate increase for infant and toddlers in the general fund. So effectively what that is a almost $5 million less of a shift to the special fund, if that makes sense, and leaves almost $5 million in general fund in the CCFAP program to support that rate increase. It's a little confusing because it's moving between special funds and it's negative general fund numbers.
So the move that the administration made in the budget adjustment, are we doing that again?
Yes.
14 million.
Because there was intention language in the budget adjustment. It was not that we would create a special reserve.
The language in the budget adjustment, I believe, said that the General Assembly would look at creating a reserve, but that it wouldn't, I don't think it spoke to whether or not you would definitely not make that move again.
It didn't, we didn't create it, we said we were
I
gonna.
understood, but my memory of that is that we were saying we were not going to do this again.
Yeah.
And as I remember, Representative Scheid was of one mind with the administration about it being a purely administrative thing. I don't necessarily see it that way myself. So,
Yeah, no, based on our conversation, I would think you would oppose it.
yeah, I do. So I'm flagging that, and I'll ask Representative Scheid when she comes in about that.
All right. So the next several ones the House agreed with the governor on. So these are sort of new or different things from FY25. I'm not going to go into any of those specifics unless you want me to. Great. We'll go to the next page. So again, agreed with the two changes of the Department of Labor for workforce expansion and the State Workforce Development Board. They added additional funding into the adult education appropriation. The projection has been increased since the governor's budget, so this added an additional $180,000 of general fund, and that's matched with $120,000 from the education fund, bringing the total for adult education to a little over $300,000 of an increase.
So does that totally accomplish what we put in statute last year?
I believe so.
Okay.
That was from what the agency believes they'll need based on their projections. The next couple lines are the 3% increase to the higher education institutions. The House agreed with the governor on those. This one is just in there as the placeholder, but they added the $1 for the Morgan Horse Farm back in. Well, it looks like a zero, but there's really $1 in there.
I have questions.
Yeah, do you want to?
I mean, I feel like I will ask those questions off.
On the Morgan Horse Farm?
Right.
I think Weston would have to explain it. It's like, goes back into the dark ages of history.
Just very curious.
It's a sacred dollar.
Okay.
It's a sacred dollar that my understanding the governor never puts in and the House always puts back. Maybe Brendan, he used to be enough, maybe on appropriation, you can tell us why they have.
What are your thoughts on the dollar?
I don't know, unless it's because Robin's from Middlebury and that's where the Morgan Horse Farm is.
Well,
Like,
it's
why,
always
yes.
been in there, right?
It's always,
Yeah,
Well, there used to be an appropriation for the Morgan Horse Farm that was significant. They changed, and it was within the context of the University of Vermont. This broke out the Morgan Horse Farm, and what they didn't want was to have to recreate the line if they ever added money to the Morgan Horse Farm. So,
Okay.
so it's been in here as
Okay.
$1 probably for the last 35 years.
Just in case
that predates me, so I wouldn't have known that.
that's very interesting.
I mean, that's a logical explanation that's different than the explanation that. But I think there's a logical base of it, but then it's like, they keep doing it because they've done it for 35 years.
Well, and
It's like a
I
running
think,
gag.
if they ever go out for certain grants, there's some sort of a plus for them to be able to say, we're state.
funded
Right,
Funded.
that makes
Right.
sense, right, to say that they receive state funds.
Mhm.
Yeah, that makes sense.
to the extent of the dollar.
They're probably not saying that, but that's, that's fair.
I think if we were gonna do away with it, that's one of the things we'd probably wanna know what we're doing before we did it.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm fine
That's
with
the
keeping it
only
in. I was just, it's
No, I think,
curious
but I
thing.
think that's what,
Thank you.
Well, you got a better answer than my first year on the committee. I was just told, that's what we do. And
Okay.
All right, I'll keep going. So line 47 is the transition to the confined animal feeding permit at the Agency of Natural Resources. The,
combined animal feeding
It's-
permit.
it's CAFO is
Yeah, confined, yeah.
The big farms. Okay.
And this is about the
Which one?
EPA's directive that Agency of Natural Resources needs to be the one that issues permits about discharges.
Oh, for stuff
for
in St.
farms.
Albans Bay.
stormwater.
For stormwater. Yep,
And farms.
yeah, specifically farms, yeah. Yeah,
It's all big farms.
well, and it's eventually, there's language in there about large, medium, and small
It's all
farms,
the
but
stuff in Franklin County,
just Franklin County, no.
mostly
we did.
Franklin County.
Happy to talk more about that. It's a big topic for us right now.
all right, I'll keep going. So then there's a couple, I won't go into the detail on the ACCD sort of contract line items.
What is the contract with Dun & Bradstreet? We're gonna hear about that? What is that?
I believe that's so they can have access to the D&B database, but that's a good question for that. All right, the next one, so there was money in for the International Business Development Office. And the governors recommend on line 51 that the House eliminated the additional funding for that. They reduced the funding for the manufactured home improvement repair program. There was a position, I believe, that was eliminated. As part of this, but that stayed in the base. The VHIP program was in the governor's recommend as a base item. This was shifted to one time, so you'll see that again on the one-time sheet as an increase. They eliminated the GROW grants at the Department of Tourism and Marketing. And then the Land Access Opportunities Board was a one-time appropriation to the governor's recommend, and they have put that into the base budget to go to VHCD.
You could have said they grew to grow. Missed your opportunity.
It's true. That's unfortunate. So then line 56 is just sort of this subtotal of all other changes. There is like lots of other changes in the budget that don't rise to the level of sort of changes in policy or contract updates or whatnot. So that's just the net of some of the other impacts. And then after that, we have the changes to the reserves.
So would we see those like in the language?
You won't see them in the line. If you were to go through all of the ups and downs and add in all the things that are not really accounted for above, you come up with 100.
Because the House does that thing.
Well, they didn't, it's the JFO, like
It's
this
just
is
it's
what's.
not, but what's the difference between the governor and the House?
So the the governor's number, this goes way too much detail. Some of the
Just
things in
more
the base and the
information.
gov, yeah, it's just tweaked a little bit. So on line 58 is when we get to changes in the reserve calculations. So for the stabilization reserve, that's calculated based on the prior year appropriations. So if we take the numbers that we just went, so the budget adjustment that the Senate has on the floor, the changes that we just went through in the FY25 budget in the C section, and then recalculate what the anticipated FY 2025 appropriations are going to be, you actually need to put less money into the stabilization reserve by statute, and then actually even less than what the governor had reserved. So this number, depending on what the Senate does with 2025, that number will potentially move, and it's sort of the last number that gets plugged in.
So it's no more than 5%.
No more than 5% of prior year appropriations. Correct.
If we wanted to put more in, we'd have to withstand that
Correct. And you can put them into the
rainy day.
rainy day fund. Yeah. So similarly, the human services caseload reserve, that's just a calculation based on the statutory reserve needs and some, end of year accounting stuff. So that is the same number as the governor's. And then what's reserved in the 2753rd reserve is also the same as GovRec based on how they're supposed to calculate that. So then if we go down to the sort of Salmon-y pink section, the other bills, the House set aside $10 million for H91, which is the emergency housing bill. It is set aside as base funds. In FY26, there's sort of a transition plan, so that $10 million would help transition to the new structure that's proposed in that bill, and then it's presumed that that money is available into the future to support the program, which is why it's in base. So after all of those changes, the governor had $60 million of base changes. The House has $84.6 million of changes. And then when we look at the revenue to support those changes, so we have the revenue forecast, the direct applications, so that's the transfers from unclaimed property, the Attorney General's office, Department of Financial Regulation, sports wagering, and liquor control. So those monies coming into the fund, it's about $100 million, plus the cannabis fund, additional transfer into the fund. So those are the revenues that are available. And then the governor had several tax credits that were proposed as part of his budget construct. They're listed in the Gov's column. The House was still in the process of making decisions on what those were going to be, but they set aside $13.5 million for tax credits from the governor. But there was no decision in terms of which items they were going to do. So after all of those changes, that leaves $47.6 million to cover of unallocated base funds that are then utilized to pay for one-time appropriations. Seems like that all makes perfect sense.
So your 82 is 81 minus 67 lines, is that it?
Yes.
To the question.
Yes,
I think we talked about this previously, on a different day, but in terms of other bills, they just had the one that had money.
So there are a couple other in the one-time appropriations section that have appropriations. I think there's one that the appropriation is in the bill itself, so it's held sort of on a separate line. And then there are some that the appropriations are in the budget to support the other bills. But this is one that the money is not appropriated in the budget. It will be in H91.
Oh, so this is one that, so does that mean that they didn't take the money out of H91? They just left it?
They left it in, yeah.
They left it in.
They didn't have H91 when they moved the budget. So, but they knew that there was about $10 million for spending, so they left $10 million, effectively left $10 million on the bottom line to pay for that bill.
And the fact that it's here, does that sort of imply that it's gonna be a part of the base?
They took it out,
where is it?
but it's still.
all be in the base.
It's in the salmon color.
Whether or not they do it or not.
There's more that's gonna be in the one-time section.
Correct.
Okay.
All right, so now we'll do the one time.
Okay. This is all the same.
Okay.
All right, so the first thing at the top, so this one's sort of the opposite, where the revenue goes first and the expenses go second, unlike the other sheet where we started with the appropriation. But if you recall, this first one that we went through that had what happens in FY 25, that's on the first line. So we're gonna assume there's $136 million carried forward from FY 2025. The reversion of 2.12, most of them. There's several reversions from the legislative branch that are put on here, and then there was an additional $2 million found through conversations with the Commissioner of Finance and Management from an appropriation made to the Agency of Administration a couple years ago for work with VHFA. You may recall in the details of the budget adjustment, there's about $3 million that was reverted in the Budget Adjustment Act that was then moved into the Insurance Reserves Fund to help pay for the ED5 settlement. And so there was another $2 million in that appropriation that is reverted as part of this construct. So that's a additional $2 million, one time of $2 million. And then the base funding used to cover one-time appropriations. That $47 million is on the bottom of the sheet we just went through, and then carries through in terms of available for one-time appropriations. So the governor had about $200 million worth of one-time funds available. The House had about $185 million worth of one-time funds available. And so that's
not to be nitpicky, but this sheet has 136.11, and here the House
Yes.
is 136. Should they match?
They could match. Two reasons why they don't match.
Okay.
One, if we land the plane on a pinhead, that would be incredible. So it's a little bit of wiggle room in terms of, and plus the BAA is not done yet, so we aren't entirely sure what that will be. Also, the way that the year-end language is written in FY 25, it says that $136 million shall be reserved and carried forward into FY 2026. That's the next fiscal year. So that we just wrote it as 136 to kind of keep it round and simple. So that's why it's $100,000 different.
Okay.
But we can update and adjust that as warranted as we move through the process.
So does the 15.88 that's there, the difference, does that mean that it's left in base funding?
Yes. So the House did more base spending than the governor did. This is sort of like the opposite of the conversations we
going
used to
forward.
have. Yep.
It's part of the base.
It's part of the base. And it's different from conversations we used to have where it was one-time money paying for base spending.
Right.
This situation, we have base spending paying for one-time spending. But some of the, there's some of these, it's also in the eye of the beholder, whether or not things are one-time or base. Sometimes it's not exactly black and white, which may become apparent as we walk through this. So, the governor had $220,000 for Ideal Vermont. I don't remember what that was, but the House decided not to do it, so that was eliminated. There's a 1.1 for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. There was $3 million appropriated for municipal technical assistance. That funding was eliminated by the House. The class.
Was that what we put in place after when the COVID money started coming in to help municipalities figure out?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Um,
So they're maybe thinking that it's time for that.
I think so. I know this would be a good question for Representative Shy, but I believe that was on recommendation of their Commerce Committee, so that funding wasn't needed.
Yeah, so part of the system was to go after federal funding.
Yeah.
So,
And to help them write their grants.
right.
Yeah.
There's less federal funding.
Yeah. So they agreed with the one-time appropriation for the classification modernization project, the additional funding for the additional match for the cybersecurity grant, the Department of Public Safety, For the one-time needs for the mobile and portable radio equipment, they had updated information and that could be reduced by $120,000. They added, 480, or I think it's $475,000 for the urban search and rescue program, which is in accordance with one of their bills, H 397. They agreed with the additional one-time funding for the Blueprint and SASH programs. And then there's an additional, also related to H 397, $275,000 for a fire apparatus at the Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation. They reduced the funding at the health department, and you'll see later for the Department of Environmental Conservation for PCB testing by 50%.
Do you know if that's because they slowed down the testing they said they were gonna do?
I don't know if it's because that's a good question for Reps Shy, why they decided to reduce that.
And if it's even for just the school program or if it was other testing.
I think it was just for school, but
Do we know how far we are in that? Because we were getting through most of the schools, weren't we?
We still have a lot.
At least in the subset that they had laid out.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's like 1980.
yeah.
I don't know, get into that.
That my only drawback to that is the House didn't wanna do the testing.
That's what I mean. I wanna know
Right.
if they're just undercutting it or if.
Yeah, because they took, when we had this fight before, they took it all up because they didn't want to do the testing.
Exactly.
Right.
I do have a question.
Yes.
Is there separate money for PCB remediation?
Yes,
And that's gonna show up?
it'll show up later.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty soon. Okay, so they removed, this is related to the recovery campus that was in the base. There's some one-time startup costs because they eliminated it in the base. They eliminated the one-time costs. Additionally, they added in $40,000 for a grant to Empty Arms through the health department, and $300,000 for recovery residencies at the health department. They agreed with the governor's recommend for $2 million to increase shelter capacity and $30.5 million of one-time funding for GA emergency housing. They reduced the facility conversion for treatment services by $100,000. That was, I think, an update that they received. They could save some money there. They sustained the governor's recommend in terms of the $4 million for education transformation and capacity building. They did add language in the big bill that says that $4 million requires joint fiscal committee approval to be released to the agency, and they need to come up with a plan. That's
Not only a plan, but a
unambiguous plan, I believe the language says.
Nice.
unambiguous.
Who's the judge of ambiguity?
Joint fiscal.
Hopefully not joint.
There she is.
The tuition advantage program, that was reduced by 50% by the House. They agreed to make the last payment to Vermont State Colleges of $5 million. The last bridge payment maintained portable radio equipment at Fish and Wildlife, the database for municipal wastewater connections, and the permitting transition for the CAFO program. So there's both money in the base and in one time to make that transition. There's a limited service position that was reduced. They reduced one position at the Department of Housing and Community Development, so only one gets extended. The new program at the Vermont Bond Bank was reduced by $1.6 million, leaving $7.5 million available. The VHFA rental revolving loan program was reduced by 50%. And the VHFA middle income development program was reduced by $5 million. This is the movement of the VHIP program from the base as proposed by the governor to a one-time appropriation. And the position was reduced by, there was one position eliminated. So the reduced by 50% really just refers to the position. So only one position for the program.
There was two programs, but they moved to one, or you mean there was one program down to half?
There was two positions, and they're only funding one of the positions for VHIP. right, I'll keep going.
Yeah.
So on line 31, I should probably come back in and talk about what's going on with the cash fund at some point, once the House institutions, or not, sorry, Senate institutions has made decisions about how to fund that. But one of the, in the governor's recommended capital bill, there was about $3 million set aside for housing development projects in 3 specific towns. There was a question about whether or not that would be, because it was projects that were linked to private development, there was a question about whether or not funding those projects through the capital bill would impact this tax exempt status of the state's bonds. So the capital, per sort of information from the treasurer's office and the testimony that House Corrections got, my understanding is that they eliminated those 3 appropriations from the capital budget. They then moved some appropriations around between the cash fund and the capital budget. And they decided, rather than do a $3 million appropriation for those projects, decided that there should be a program at ACCD for $2 million. So moving sort of money around between 3 different funds and whatever lands, $2 million appropriated out of the big bill, one-time funds for this housing development assistance grant or whatever program at ACCD to fund that.
Okay.
I can draw a flow chart. That's helpful to follow that. Okay. There was another $15,000 for a study on universal design. DHCD, I think was part of the housing bill that passed by the House. And a reduction of $50,000 to the grant to the Vermont Professionals of Color Network. There was $2 million originally allocated for brownfield revitalization. That was eliminated by the House. And on line 35 at the very bottom is the Land Access Opportunities Board. So that was a one-time appropriation to the governor, and that shows up as a base appropriation in the House version of it.
Do you happen to know what that was last year?
The Land Access Opportunities Board? Not sure. We can find out.
Okay. Well, because we have Representative Shy here, should we move to that? What else did you have left?
We can do that. So I can finish up. So the 31 additional 5, I can go fast. $5 million for the Vermont Housing Conservation Board and new money. And this is all new stuff added by the House. So there's no comparison to GovRec. These are all 0. Additional money for the volunteer income tax assistance at the treasurer's office to help folks prepare their income taxes. Money for comprehensive payment reform, which is a recommendation from the House Healthcare Committee. Additional money for the OneCare primary care transition. If you want details on that, no one will have to answer them. An additional $750,000 for the Tech Hub at the University of Vermont. $300,000 for the Crop Cash program. And $500,000 for Vermonters Feeding Vermonters, which is a food bank, I believe. $240,000 for the Home Share program at Dale. $1.5 million for the Freedom and Unity grants at VSAC. $10,000 for the USS Vermont Support Group. Additional general fund to help draw down additional federal funds for the Arts Council. $1 million to start the mileage-based user fee program with the Agency of Transportation. And $200,000 for the Advanced Vermont program at the Department of Labor. So those are all the one-time appropriations. So almost the same as the governor, just a little, about $1.5 million less. But then there was an additional, in H472, there's an additional position at the Secretaries of State's offices. I believe that that bill has them regulating mental health professionals. The $170,000 is sort of that first year to get the program off the ground, and then it will be paid for by the fees that they collect in the future. And then so additionally, I remember there was almost $185,000 worth of revenue available for one-time appropriations. Through the appropriations, there are 98 million, excuse me. And then there's the transfer to the education fund. So they conferred with the governor and assumed $77.2 million will be transferred to from the general fund to the education fund. The Agency of Digital Services requested $15 million to be transferred into the Computer Information Technology Fund to help deal with a transition to a new payment model. The House reduced that by $5 million. This is the PCB testing. So the governor recommended transferring $9.5 million into the Environmental Contingency Fund for the Department of Environmental Conservation to use for PCB remediation and continued testing. That was reduced by $4 million.
This, Mr. Chair,
It's,
this is something that I'm very confused by because, as you noted, the House has generally opposed the testing, but they have called very, very loudly at every moment for more money for remediation so as to not leave districts on the hook. So I'm waiting for Representative Scheid to explain how reducing it by 40% would make sense given their stated positions over the last couple of years at least. But that seems to me a dramatic reduction.
okay.
And then so in line 58 is the transfer to the cash fund, and the way we've carried this is so there's $14 million in the base that's transferred to the cash fund. So the presumption is that $14 million transfer is ongoing, but in FY26 there's going to be a $7 million reduction to the transfer to the cash fund based on the spending that the House Corrections and Institutions Committee approved from the cash fund. So there's some more general fund available by reducing that transfer. I don't know why it's in bold, but there's also $450,000 transfer to the Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund. And when we get through all of those, so those transfers total up to $85 million. The total one-time appropriations and transfers are $184 million. On the bottom line, that leaves $1.5 million approximately.
That's the House's president, is that?
That's the House's presentation.
Nice, thank you.
They left us one.
Yeah, we get 1.5, it makes it our work easier. We don't have.
So with that, I can turn it over to Representative Scheid.
Okay, thank you. Unless anybody has questions from the Senator Watson.
Just as a matter of process, since I'm new to the committee, I assume we'll be talking through all of these. We've talked about having a list of asks that we see. I mean, is that list that we've talked about, is that just for, for example, nonprofits that would like additional funds, or if there are things in here that we see that, there was a reduction and maybe it shouldn't be reduced, or should we be adding those things to the list as well? And then we'll go through that big list?
Yeah.
Okay. So everything?
Both,
Okay,
yeah.
both. Great. Super, thank you.
Yeah, Senator.
Question.
Watson.
On the education fund piece and the transfer there, that was all based on budgets, in the governor's budgets, based on budgets from estimates that were last December, in November and December. Based upon the budgets that was passed, has anybody done an update and a calculation to make sure that all matches?
Yep.
So that 77 million hasn't changed at all?
Correct.
Okay.
And if, it's probably worth having Julia Richter come in and sort of talk about where the ed fund stands in terms of, because there was also the decision, so there's the 77 million, the decision by the House to not eliminate the universal meals program.
Yeah.
But then that was all netted against the, I believe there was, I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but budgets came in less than was anticipated.
Yeah, that's why I asked the question, that budgets came in less, and
Correct.
that's why I asked, has there been a calculation to whether that was the right number?
Well, right number, how would you define the right number?
Well,
Actually,
that comes up based upon the assumptions of what it was originally set aside for.
Because it doesn't get you to zero, I understand. We can have Julia to talk about that.
It does not get it to
At one point,
zero.
they thought this number would get to zero.
Right.
And it doesn't get to zero.
Correct. And I believe that's because.
Well, it doesn't get you there if you don't do the school lunches.
But even,
All those kids there.
yeah, it might be even more than the school lunch
Correct. The school lunch amount is bigger than the same, than
Then the delta
Jews.
is to zero.
projected budget based on town.
Right. So it just,
Okay,
All right,
thank you, Emily.
you're welcome.
Thanks for the big spreadsheets.
I have others, if you,
Oh,
I
good.
didn't get through all of them.
I'm excited. Representative Shy, please join us.
Nice to see you all again.
Yes. We still haven't finished the other project we're working on.
I know. Who would have thought? Representative Robin Scheid from Middlebury, Chair of House Appropriations Committee. Thank you for having me come and talk about the budget. I'm glad I came in a little early to hear some of the questions. I guess I want to start by saying that a little bit to Senator Watson's question. We created a spreadsheet of all the asks that we got from nonprofits at the 2 public hearings that we had, others that came to us, sent us letters, committee testimony of things that were maybe outside the usual things, and legislative requests, which were mostly sort of confirming that certain things that they'd heard they wanted to support also. So we had 14 legislators. We had 88 people at the 2 public hearings that we did jointly. So I started a list and then we finished it, and it turned out to be that there were 7 times the amount of requests in dollars versus the amount of money we thought we could pull out of the governor's. The governor has his own wish list, right? The 1 times and the other things that we found in there. So we had, for every dollar in the governor's wish list, there was $7 elsewhere. So it was really difficult we had to make a lot of decisions on how to do things. And I was, the House has heard me say that getting off that list is like getting into Harvard. I mean, it was just really difficult to get things off. This is that year when we can't do things. We did do a number of big things. The infamous JTOC transfer. We finally said, okay, this is the year. So we didn't take that $20 million that's been coming to the general fund for the budget every year out of the transportation fund. T-Fund needs the help, and we agreed. So that's one of the big things that we did. I'm just going to respond to Senator Baruch's comment, because I've heard PCBs a couple of times. So the governor had put in $9.5 million plus for PCBs. We asked the Department of Environmental Conservation for over 2 months to tell us what the projects were, what they would be doing. And we never got an answer, despite repeated requests. And our feeling was, given the list of requests and asks and the issues that we have with the fragile healthcare system, with housing needs and everything else, that maybe they don't need that whole amount this year. And so they couldn't tell us any projects that they were going to do. They just didn't respond to us. So we said, we'll cut it in half as budget adjustment. They're not going to get through $9.5 million between now and January anyway. So we had no information from them.
As I said before, I just found it surprising because Representative Conlon and others have argued very, very strongly that we need to be putting more money. If we're going to be doing testing, we need more money going into that fund. Did that recommendation include the Ed Committee?
Oh, they knew that we were doing this. They didn't have a problem with it.
Interesting. Okay.
I don't like just putting money out there unless I know what it's going to be used for. And so that's why you'll see also there was $4 million for education transformation, which basically had no language around it, but just education transformation. And so we put language in that said, sure, once you have some real plans, then we will, we'll further appropriate the money, but we're not just giving you $4 million.
And before we leave PCBs,
yep.
So if the department were to get back to us with specifics about the money, do you consider that money that you've taken from remediation already in your view spent elsewhere, or?
Well, we only left you 1.53 million, so yes. But I mean, I'd like to see, I would want to see what are the projects, what's the timeline for the projects, how much are they going to be able to spend before we get to budget adjustment.
And I guess that makes sense, but in the world of PCB testing, you can find out, because the testing is ongoing in a
The
slow.
testing got stopped.
I heard it was slow and not slow. So if, the thing is, if they discover a school that's, I mean, if you have additional information, that.
Right, well, what I was told and what I'm remembering, and anybody in Jacob can correct me if I'm wrong, but, or somebody else, but I was told that, that they were not doing new testing. So any of the testing, the money that was in the budget was maybe testing after they'd done some remediation to see if what the remediation worked or not, but not, that it was not testing new schools. That's
Okay.
my understanding.
And so in that case, you're limiting what you put into already articulated costs.
Mhm.
Okay, and so I'll check into that a little bit.
Yeah, we could have them
Thank
in.
Okay, yeah.
Sarah Lyons.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the one-time funding for
Mhm.
comprehensive payment reform
Yeah.
and primary care transition. And so is there language in the bill on that? How was that? That was obviously, came from House Health Care.
It came from House Health Care.
They hadn't had the, says Viva, so I'm wondering what is the payment reform that's being asked for? And then the
I believe it has
primary
to do with primary care, but I'm gonna phone a friend if somebody like Nolan knows, can answer that question.
I haven't looked at it yet. So
Okay. I'm just,
blind.
Remember that one.
Okay.
I did not bring my committee letters with me to.
So, okay,
to
but
tell
it's
you.
not related to
No
legislation?
No,
There's no language.
There's no language, it's just money in there, they're sort of a placeholder, I guess, for
No, there's a
what?
purpose for it. I'll get back to you on.
That would be great, okay.
so when we were looking at the budget, we knew that housing of all kinds is a priority, not just any one type of housing, but everything from recovery housing to, middle income revolving or, programs to home share to, recovery residences, all kinds of housing, Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. So that was one of our big priorities. Healthcare is clearly a fragile system. We are some tough straits there. The ACO is going away. The Accountable Care Organization and the AHEAD program, assuming it happens, there's this year gap. And so the governor had put money in to cover some of that, but didn't really cover all of that. And then we've had issues, as we know, with Blue Cross Blue Shield and
Did he
some
put
of the
that into
hospitals.
that base budget? Because it's not in the one time, trying to figure out where that is.
There were various things that, the governor put in. I don't have the base spreadsheet in
Okay.
front of me.
Blueprint and stash are in the one times.
Yeah, 2.8
Okay.
So, and the primary care transition, all of those are one time. At this point.
It's all House recommends.
Well, 10.8 was government. And then the stash stuff was all, committee recommendation.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
So we focused, a bunch of the spending choices on housing, on healthcare, on other services that we needed to either shore up fragile systems. For example, we were able to do a 2% increase for the DAs and SSAs, which includes more than the DAs and SSAs, as we learned because of the coding thing. So there are more organizations involved in that. We also provided for a 4.5% increase for the infant and toddler care in the CCFAP program. That's the most challenging group to get teachers, daycare providers in that age group. And it's a higher ratio of people to work because infants and toddlers require, I don't know whether it is 2 to 1, 3 to 1. It's something different than once you're 18 months old. I think it's a bit different. And I'm recalling back to my kids.
Just more
so-
money for the younger kids.
But that's where the need is too, because parents are trying to go back to work and it's hard if there aren't enough spaces for them to send their infants and toddlers to daycare to get. So it's a workforce issue too.
Could I ask, on CCFAP, the intent language that was in the budget adjustment,
Mm-hmm.
my sense of that was that we were trying to avoid doing some shifts of the payroll tax or the general fund,
Right.
one or both. And that we would instead be looking to create a reserve or possibly put more money into the program. And it seems here we've gone along with the governor in terms of reducing that.
We reduced the general fund amount,
Yeah,
but we used some of the general fund to do this infants and toddlers.
yes,
the e-board and the revenue forecast in July and then again in January increased the amount of revenue that's expected to be collected through the payroll tax much higher than we originally anticipated. So I think it was originally going to be around 71 or 70 something million, and now it's up to 90 or 98 million. So we're going to have more money in that special fund than we expected. We aren't using that for infant and toddlers. We're using general fund money. And in addition, in the Budget Adjustment Act, what we did was we said that we could use if there was any problem, because this is an entitlement program and anybody who qualifies can get the money for the vouchers. If we had a problem and we ran low in the special fund, that we could access the human services, I never said this right, human services caseload reserve fund. That was worked out with the administration. In fact, they suggested that when we were looking in a different direction. So.
Right, I'm just wondering, frankly, especially given that the governor vetoed childcare because of the payroll tax, now money from the payroll tax instead of or the composite payroll tax and general fund that was supposed to be going in is now twice been reduced to cover other things.
The general fund portion, not
Yes.
the payroll tax portion.
Yes.
That is dedicated.
Right, but I guess it was all predicated to go together. So I'm wondering why we're not moving in the direction of serving more Vermonters or changing the eligibility requirements or using, if we're bringing in more payroll funding, why aren't we using it to help the kids, which is why we put it in place, instead of through a series of transfers, enabling other programs that were not thought of when we put the payroll tax in place.
So I'm probably not going to be the best person to answer some of those questions. So we have more from the payroll tax than we expected by quite a bit of money, which is good news. We didn't know, I think the feeling was that certainly for FY25 and possibly beyond, that we were probably overcompensating for what we actually needed. So we were putting more in than what we thought we were going to need. And so I think this is why we're seeing some of these changes in the general fund.
I'm just worried that we're going to slowly move to every time reducing the general fund, and eventually, yes, it's an entitlement, but there will never be the resources to increase what we're doing. And we only, what we did was historic by one measure, but it was not what's necessary in that field. And I feel like we have an opportunity to use that extra payroll tax. But instead we're saying, not to mention that they've just begun their advertising campaign very recently.
Right, and they did have in October 1st, they expanded eligibility, and that was going to be the highest level of eligibility expansion. We don't know how it's going to sugar off yet, right? Because we haven't even really had 6 months of the program. So I would expect that by next session, we would have a much better handle, because we would have had a full year plus of the payroll tax and a full year of the expanded eligibility for that. So I think we'll know more at that point.
Okay, fair enough. I just want to flag that as something that I worry about.
Yes.
Eroding what we are in effect.
Right. And so we chose focusing on infant and toddler based on what we heard out of House Human Services. Let's Grow Kids seems to be really pleased with the choices that we've made, given the situation.
I would differ.
I can show you.
I just.
Yes, well, I'm sure everybody wants more. I get that, but this is what we felt that we were able to do, given the 7-to-1 ratio of asks versus available funds.
Sarah Lyons, did you have questions?
No, I do have something I'm thinking about though.
Okay.
So do I.
Were there other things you wanted to bring up to?
I'm trying to think what other things that I've heard. I mentioned we did a variety of housing because we need all different kinds of housing. We did fund some of this brand new program, the Bond Bank Infrastructure Sustainability Fund. We heard from the executive director of the bond bank, and felt very comfortable reducing that amount from 9.1 million to 7.5 million. They have a pooled fund of $660 million. And what he said was that they they just need, for a project, they might just need 100,000 or a couple 100,000 or whatever from this fund, and then they could leverage it to use money from this pooled fund. So we aren't limited to the amount that's in here. And when we asked about the fund and how they came up with $9.1 million, the answer we got was that was what was left over. So it wasn't based on science, I guess I'd say. So we felt comfortable starting a program. They're not going to be able to spend it all in the first year. There aren't terms. They haven't set it all up yet. So that seemed like a reasonable amount of money for us to give them. We all like the program. Looking forward to seeing how it works. But it's a brand new program.
I had a question on the judiciary and the tech fund revenue replacement. We had questions from the show. Maybe Robin can tell us. I don't know if you're looking at the same sheet. This is base, yeah.
Okay, the one spreadsheet I don't have. Do you have a base spreadsheet I can borrow?
Take
The base.
Or take Peru there. Here's one. We have.
Oh, I got one right here. Thanks.
Did you have an extra one?
Yes, I have it.
I'll get it back.
Tech fund revenue replacement, that was because that turned out to be about what they needed, and the legislator who has that, Representative Squirrel, was comfortable with making it that number, and I can't give you a lot more detail about that. That was his portfolio, and they were comfortable with that change.
And also on that same page, line, I think 26.
The recovery campus?
Funding, yeah.
I believe, again, there were a number of things that were in the budget that were not particularly well thought out or planned at this point, and so it was kind of an idea as opposed to something with a lot of detail attached to it.
Okay. So like something you have to wait for next year.
Yes.
Do you know if that was in, if there's language about that in the big public safety bill? No, the recovery center language. This is recovery campus, and there's also the transitional recovery center. We don't know. It's okay.
Sorry, if it's somebody else's big bill, I probably don't know what it is.
Okay.
And the idea to move money from the general fund to the transportation fund for the mileage-based user fee?
Yes. So I don't know how much you've heard about it in Senate
We did
transportation.
talk about that. We have a quorum here, so we can make decisions.
So it's a way to, I can't explain it all that
Well,
well,
you
but I
have
know
to-
that they're gonna bring back about
why is
$5
it
to $6
coming-
million
Why is it
back.
coming out of general fund?
They wanted $3 million in general fund money to start affecting this change. They need general fund money to do it because they don't have other funds, is my understanding. And so we said, how much can you live with in the first year? Because it's gonna take a while. It's not gonna be, again, an overnight thing. So they were happy to have $1 million to get this ball rolling.
Yeah.
And somebody else who's probably on Senate transportation can say more.
Well, it's a $3.7 million project. It's supposed to be done by July 1st of '26. So if all they have, if the federal government does pull the grant, this is $1 million towards a $3.7 million.
They already have 750,000
Yeah.
in hand.
700, yeah.
Yeah, 700. So they wanted to have 3 more, and this wasn't even originally in our calculation about doing this
If I
budget at all.
might finish, that puts you at 1.7.
Mhm.
And so you can't make the timeline to do that. A piece of this is you appropriate the 1.1 million. If they get the federal grant, does the 1 million just sit there?
I can't tell you the answer to
So
that.
we have issues with this, I guess, or
Yes.
foreshadowing some questions.
Yes, well, we had transportation committee come in and talk to us about it, and they knew that we weren't gonna be able to do 3 million, and they were pleased to be able to get more, and that's what I can tell you.
Okay. Senator Norris, our friend on this first?
Well, don't matter, go ahead, Bob.
Seniority, go ahead.
Okay, quick one. There are a lot of people up in the islands who are following the no-foot program. And I see you've added 300,000. Do you know if that was their ask or?
I believe they may have asked for 500,000. Last year we did 300,000, so we
Okay.
level funded what they did.
Senator Norris?
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yes, on, the one-time funds, under, on line 10, urban search and rescue.
Mhm.
I see the governor put nothing in the budget, and the House put in $480,000 according with H 397. H 397, I believe, creates 2 positions within that division at a cost of $225,000 for the 2 positions, not a piece.
We did not do anything with positions.
Well, it says additional funding in accordance with H 397.
We were, as far as I know, were there positions? I'm looking at Chris.
Research on fiscal, these are 2 different issues in the
Yeah.
same bill. The
That's
bill
right.
had originally created 2 additional positions at emergency management. The House took those out of the bill and did not fund or create them. What they did do was put another one-time appropriation in for the urban search and rescue team, which is a different program.
So they went from 250 up to 480?
No, they went
No.
down from, I believe,
750 to 480.
2 totally different issues.
There were 4 different appropriations in that bill, and 2 of them were for positions. We did not do that.
Didn't fund those.
We funded the fire apparatus,
Oh, that was.
AKA a fire
That's where
truck,
that
for
came from.
270,
That was also
5,
at 397.
which shows up as 28, and then the 48 was probably 475, rounded up, for urban search and rescue, one-time money.
Okay.
But no new positions. We really tried to minimize new positions.
Well, last year they asked for 750.
Yeah, and that was a one-time.
Senate appropriations gave them 250.
Correct.
So with the fire truck in here, I can see where the 750 comes from. So in essence,
Well, we did that in the BAA. No, what do you mean we gave them 2?
one-time funding in appropriations last year.
That was 750.
Well, they asked 750, they got 250.
These are several different issues that are all being mixed together.
We'll do that when we get it earlier in the day then and discuss.
Wasn't the one time last year a full 750,000?
Yeah, there, whatever the amount was, there's no ongoing funding.
Right, yeah,
For the
it's a
urban
one-
search and rescue, so this is the second
So is it
one-time appropriation.
250 or 750? It was 250 last year.
They asked for 750.
They asked for
Right, they asked for
750
750 this year, we gave them 475.
for several different things.
For urban search and rescue, no positions.
I agree with the no positions.
And then the fire apparatus, even though that's not USAR, it was in the same bill.
Yes, yes, and that's 275, and obviously it rounds up on these sheets.
And so the Fish and Wildlife or Forest and Park, when they came in here, they didn't mention wanting fire apparatus.
It goes to DEC, doesn't it, or it goes?
First part.
It does go to Forest Park.
So,
That was the priority of the committee that did this bill. These are the 2 priorities of the committee. So, you know, when we figure out the budget, we ask all the committees to send us back letters of what their priorities are. And then I go back around and I say, okay, now what are really your priorities? Because we don't have enough money for all your priorities. And then they tell me what that is. And so that's where we are.
Well, and I meet with Representative Squirrel tomorrow at 8:45, so maybe he can enlighten. We both have the DPS, which includes the fire and the use run. So,
Representative Harrison has this
I don't know what he wants to talk
Department of
about
Public
then.
Safety.
Yes, I have met with Jim, yes.
Yeah, he's the one who has this in his budget.
Well, Representative Squirrel and myself crossed paths at some point, so we'll
Okay.
discuss that tomorrow.
You're welcome to, but that is not part of his portfolio.
I realize that, thank you. Just inform me of that.
Senator Watson.
Thank you. On the one-time appropriations line 6, the municipal technical
Yeah.
assistance that got removed.
That's right.
Tell me more about that.
When we talked to our House Commerce Committee, they said, you don't need that money. We have other money in other places for doing things. And so they felt that that wasn't a priority.
Okay. Thank you.
Did you reach into the opioid settlement fund for any of the, for example, recovery residences or any of the supporting?
Yeah, I think there was 300,000 in recovery residences. Was that from the opioid settlement? That wasn't.
You
was it?
didn't take-
No.
You didn't take anything in the big bill out of the opioid
Right.
settlement fund because it was a completely separate bill. So the recovery residences or whatever, it's in that bill is not.
H218, and things are in
Yeah.
a separate bill.
Okay, so.
And the only thing we changed in that was, in that bill, was the settlement advisory committee had said they only wanted to fund 50% of the opioid prevention center in Burlington, and we had them change it to be 100% because they were going to use it. So that was it, and that the money was in there and it had been reserved, but they only wanted to appropriate half for 1 year. So, so that was the only change that made. So we didn't reach in and take other things. So there's still money available in the opioid settlement fund. And I'm sure we have people on our committee who'd be happy to give you a list.
Okay.
So it's a separate bill.
Yeah, also in the one-time transfers, just noticing that the ADS billing model change is less by $5 million. I know that they are in a lot of, they're in flux there about how they're doing their billing. We'd just love to know your thinking around that one.
Again, it's priorities. And we recognize the importance. We actually put some language in the big bill about them not being able to bill back the agencies for their cost differential, so that other agencies and departments who got very surprised in budget adjustment will not get surprised. Everything on here is, yes, there were priorities and we had to make decisions and we felt it was important, but $10 million is important, maybe not 15 right now.
Fair enough. Well, and I'm wondering, is if I'm recalling, they were going to be changing to sort of fronting or billing on the front end rather than the back end. Right. And so will that change still be allowed?
It'll still be happening.
That will still be
It's
happening.
It's going to be happening, maybe take a little longer than it will.
Okay, that's good to know. So it doesn't necessarily prevent the changes that they want to see, just on a longer timeline.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Anybody else have any other questions? The good work of the house?
Did anybody talk to you about the joint fiscal committee, the federal funds piece?
We did hear about that.
Okay.
We haven't gone through the language at
Okay.
all, but
All right, fine. I won't.
we did get some information on
Probably
that yesterday. Which seemed like the reception was well received and that we needed to do something, and that seemed like a smart way to do it.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Well, we will go through it more with our fine-tooth comb.
I'm sure we will.
We just hope that you're better at this than you are picking basketball teams in the college tournament.
Well, I have to make a comment. I was told I needed to make a comment about the current chair of Senate Appropriations and why he couldn't do as well when he was on House Appropriations.
I'm the vice chair. I'm not
Vice
quite
chair.
chair.
Vice chair.
Yeah, well.
Why he couldn't do as well when he was the ranking member of House Appropriations.
It's the environment here.
I'm not the
Brings
guy
out
who
the
brought
best
you down last year, by the way.
Well, we're happy that you're having beginner's luck.
All right.
Fair enough.
Already looking forward to next year.
Yes. See you next year.
All right, thanks for coming.
All right, thanks.
You guys gonna take the rest of the year off? Is that what you
Plans.
Right.
Thank you.
So Emily, did you have other sheets you wanted to show us?
Maybe. Oh, yeah, sure. I got 2 more I'll show you today.
Okay.
Call it.
We don't have too many sheets in one day.
No, I'm not gonna bring my. This one is basically, this is just a different, this one is the same information, but shown a little differently. And has the one-time appropriations from not the general fund, which I think are also important to look at, since we're technically appropriating all the money. So this list should match, and this doesn't have the governor's proposal in it, but this is just the list. It'll match the bill. If you walk through the section B 1100 of the bill, it'll have all these appropriations in it, but just in terms of other, so the general fund ones, we've walked through what all of those are, but in terms of other funds, so from the pilot special fund, there is the $1 million to support the municipal grand list stabilization program. Chris, is that another bill or is that in the budget?
It is in both.
It's in both,
The
okay.
language is in both, but the money to pay for it is only in the budget.
The money's in the budget.
And was that in both, the governor's rec and the?
Yeah.
Sorry, I need a little bit of clarification about how this document is different than
It is the same.
it is the same.
It just has, the thing that's different about it is it gives you, it doesn't have the governor's stuff on it, it also gives you the other funds. So I mostly just wanted to touch base on the other
But the
appropriations.
stuff that's in the other funds is not on.
It's not on the other sheet, right? The other sheet is just general fund and balancing the general fund. So these are sort of appropriations you're making out of other funds
I see.
that you should
Okay.
be aware that this also in the House bill.
Right, okay, thank you.
So the first, yeah, right, yeah, the first one, line 3, that's the $1 million from the pilot fund. On line, I need a ruler, 8, this is the federal match for the primary care and medical home community health team. Line item, I think that's the blueprint and stash, is sort of how it's labeled on the other side. I should probably make sure the names are the same, but that's the federal fund, federal match for that line item. If we go down to line 19, $185,000 out of the Fish and Wildlife Fund. So you recall there is $185,000, well, I don't know if I showed you that sheet. There's a $185,000 transfer to the Fish and Wildlife Fund from the general fund, and then appropriated out of the Fish and Wildlife Fund to support operations at the Fish and Wildlife Department. On line 23, this is the appropriation of the money that's transferred to the Environmental Contingency Fund for PCB testing and remediation of $5.5 million. You also have on line 24, $14.5 million appropriated out of the cash fund and out of sub-account B of the cash fund for state match for the IIJA investments in drinking water and clean water revolving loan fund. So there won't be any more money in cash fund B at the end of FY26 if all of this is appropriated and goes forward. In line 37, this is the global commitment. This is the sort of double count. This is the global commitment appropriation that aligns with the two in line 8 and 9. So we have to appropriate the general fund, the federal fund, and then again, the global commitment funds. In line
What do you mean 8 and 9, or do you mean 7? Where, or?
7 and 8, sorry.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I thought, okay, thanks.
Yes, not FDR, does not have anything.
I didn't think so.
Line 46, we have the $1.4 million appropriated from the transportation fund for level 1 and level 2 charging stations.
Isn't that just a transfer?
Track that money for me.
Chris is
That's what we
here.
already talked about.
This is, you talked about it this morning in the T-bill. This is the one-time appropriation of T funds to the agency for the ACCD charging program.
Why isn't it a transfer?
Because you're not moving money from one fund to another fund. You're appropriating the money from the T fund to V-Trans.
And then V-Trans transfers it to ACCD.
So there is a transfer.
There is a
But
transfer.
not in your budget.
But not in the
because
budget.
Title 19 restricts T fund dollars. You can't send T fund dollars to a bunch of other agencies.
So we transfer it to the agency.
You appropriate it to V-Trans to then do an interdepartmental transfer. You're not doing an inter-fund transfer.
Right. We can't, and it's not there already. Since it was, we have to appropriate it.
This is a new appropriation.
But we did last.
You did it in the current fiscal year based on the amount of money that you were expected to raise in the current fiscal year from the EV money. This is all FY26.
Right. I just don't remember, did we do it the same way last year? I just didn't remember.
I believe you did.
No, we appropriated and then transferred it. The 700,000.
You appropriated it, and then the agencies work amongst themselves to run the program.
Yeah, maybe we can do a budget 2.0. What did they do? How to speak like an appropriator, and like there's multiple ways to transfer.
Right.
Do it the right way, otherwise it doesn't work. It's
Right.
a whole other
And we
side.
have to do it this way just because we are making a transfer. Normally, we wouldn't have to appropriate money that the agency of transportation collected themselves.
No, you have to appropriate every dollar.
But why would we not appropriate it in the transportation?
It is
You are
out of the,
appropriating it
it
in the
is,
transportation fund. You're just doing it in the budget bill where all the appropriations live.
Yeah, all of the figures in the end up in the big bill.
Yes, all the appropriations.
The whole transportation bill.
That's what.
All of the
D900
spending.
The entire D900 section is appropriations of T fund dollars.
All of the spending,
Yes.
right. The T-bill is the directions. The budget is the actual spending authority.
Okay.
That's how it would. Okay, and then the last one in terms of, other funds being appropriated. So this is another instance where the instructions happen in one bill and the appropriations happen in the other, which is the cash fund for capital investments. So the, capital bill has the sort of, this is how the intent on how to spend the cash fund, and then the actual spending authority and appropriations are in the big bill. So the cash, there is gonna be $11.3 million spent from the cash fund in FY 2026 per the House budget to be finalized.
And back on 24, the clean water revolving funds, you said that this section would be zeroed out, or I can't remember what wording you used.
Yes, so the complication with the cash fund is it's the only fund that we've ever seen this, but where there's two sub-accounts within the special fund. One of them is what we normally talk about is the cash fund for capital infrastructure, which corrections and institutions has jurisdiction. They sort of make recommendations to appropriations.
Right.
Then there's the cash fund B, which had the funds that were set aside in that fund were mostly for the purposes of IIJA match when it was set aside. So once the IIJA match has been fully liquidated, which will be in FY 26, then there will be nothing left in cash fund B, unless you put something else in it.
But there's still the clean water revolving funds.
Yes, the clean water revolving fund still exists. This is just the match for the IIJA extra clean water revolving fund that came through in that bill.
Yeah. Okay.
The only other one that I have, and we can do a quick walkthrough of it, is the reserve. What'll be left in what's in the reserve, what projected to be in the reserve at the end of the fiscal year. So based on the sort of the transfers that we had going in and out and what's been sitting in those reserves from prior years, the stabilization reserve is projected to have $118 million in it at the end of FY 26. The balance reserve or the rainy day fund, 98.1. The human services caseload reserve, 91.8 million. 2753 will have $20.3 million in it for a total general fund reserves of $328 million at the end of FY 26. I think that's everything for now. Unless there's other questions.
That's a good overview of all the work the House did in H493. And is there statutory limitations on what the stabilization reserve can be used for? And I'm talking about like, if there's a for the federal fund.
Sure, so the stabilization reserve can't really be used, like the stabilization reserve, that's 5%, that one can't
The
really be
other,
touched.
the other two can.
What do you mean
Yes.
it can't be touched, why would you have it?
So it's more for like managing, fluctuations at the end of the fiscal year in terms of,
If we end the
Cash.
fiscal year and we estimated wrong and we overspent, that will cover
Or
the
under,
whole.
or under revenue.
And, that's the one particularly that Wall Street and, the finances will look at if we ever touched.
Which ones?
the
Stabilization.
Just the stabilization,
That's the
yeah.
5% that, is there in case we miscalculate it.
It's just like,
How do we fill the, how do we determine the other reserves? Is it just money, available monies?
Yeah, so the balance reserve can be filled with either transfers from the General Assembly, or this is the one that gets talked about with the year-end construct a lot. So this is where at the end of the fiscal year, if there's any unreserved or unallocated general fund, 50% would go into the balance reserve. And that's sort of how it's funded. There was some money that went into it last year because there was money over and above the contingent appropriation list. So how many gets into that? There is a little bit more flexibility around using the stabilization reserve, and there is, this is the sort of like 2.0 that Catherine was talking about on Friday in terms of understanding the year-end construct and what the proposed changes are. Current law, if I can remember off the top of my head correctly, says that the emergency board can use 50% of the prior year, or the legislature can use 50% of the prior year transfer to the balance reserve. There's two issues with that, is that not every year there's a transfer to the stabilization reserve, which half zero is zero, so that doesn't really help anybody. So there's proposed language in the House version of the budget that changes it, that says, I believe the emergency board or the General Assembly can access like 5 to 10% of it. Can't remember what number it landed on. I think it was actually 10% of that fund, which is only $9 million or $9.8 million based on what's in there today. But that was added. It was added both, one, because having zero or 50% of zero doesn't make a lot of sense, but also sort of trying to anticipate what may or may not happen at the federal level to just provide a little bit more of a release valve if there are changes in federal funding that they need to react to, or that we need to deal with when the General Assembly is out of session.
and the caseload reserve is
The caseload reserve
statutory formula.
statutory formula, kind of based on, so part of what the Human Services caseload reserve is used for is, so Medicaid claims have a 3-month tail, and they're not paid out immediately, they're sort of paid out after the fact. So to the extent the state has a liability for that, if you were to sort of close the books or end Medicaid at any point in time, there would need to be 3 months of payout. So the stabilization reserve is reserved sort of against what that liability is. So the calculation is sort of based on what that anticipated liability is, setting money aside. And then there's some other money that went into it. That's sort of like similarly, I believe if there is, at the end of the fiscal year, if Medicaid claims came in higher than anticipated, there's a sort of a mechanism to dip into that fund to help cover costs that need to be at closeout. But it's sort of an example of when you might need to dip into the stabilization reserve. I think like when COVID hit and there was not a lot of time to close the fiscal year and not a lot of time to react to the changing, nobody knew what was going to happen with revenues when that happened, all that kind of stuff. Like that's the sort of why that's there, that in case.
Or the reach-up caseload ran hot.
Yeah, right, that would be a Human Services caseload reserve use. If the child care runs hot, the caseload reserve can be used for that.
So they're only kind of real reserves that we could use without more complications is the balance reserve.
Yeah.
Or if there's a lot of federal money that they can.
Well, that's my question. In the Human Services caseload reserve, could we tweak this to use this for if Medicaid, if programs went away?
I don't know, we can look into that.
Yeah, if the feds cut Medicaid, I would think there would be a way to use both of them.
Both being the balance reserve and the human services.
Yeah, I would think there would be.
Right, and I think what's important too to remember about the reserves is they are one-time money. Right? So they're a pot of money that's sitting there, it's not like we regenerate $300 million to sit there. It's sort of prior year money that's available. So to the extent it was to get used for some sort of cuts, it's a Band-Aid, right?
And if it's the stabilization reserve, you would be
Yes.
to make up the difference next year, so you would immediately lose it.
Correct.
And the difficulty with, and I don't mean to, in the way this gets presented, is what people will say to you, oh, if you've got 328 million sitting on the bottom line, you can just use it for anything. And they don't realize the stabilization reserve, we immediately would, the bond houses would come in and they would ding us, and it would cost us higher interest rates for the borrowing we do.
Okay. Anything else you want to tell us, Emily?
I'm sure, yes, but not today.
Okay, you can reserve what you want to tell us for some day in the future.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So, committee, we will have to do the same process as, the two people are leaving for a meeting, so we'll end. We have to go kind of the same process that the House did, where we haven't shared the sheets with all the asks, but, the spreadsheet that has all the bills, all the public information asks, emails that we've gotten, comments that committee members have made. But if you look at what the House did, and there's anything you want to add to it, you would have to find, other than the 1.3 they left on the line.
The gift.
You'd have to, that was their gift. We'd have to find something to cut. Something to think about.
Well, just because they put it on the list doesn't mean it's our priority.
No, definitely. But if you're just wanting to add things, you'll also have to find something to take away.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at things
We
to
might
add, you
take
also
their
have to
whole
look at
list
things that you
and
don't
say
think.
0 to you, and here's what we want.
Yes.
So, our committee is going to be listening to people, I think it's next week, about their asks. Some of them
Your
are
committee.
here.
When you say our committee,
Our
you mean
committee,
your
like
committee.
down the hall.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one.
And then if there is any other, we don't normally take any more testimony from anybody, but if there's some issue like Bruce's comment about the PCB testing, if we want to have Department of Environmental Conservation come in here and talk about what the deal is with that, we can do that. So if there's any other testimony you want to hear, we can do that. That clarifies any of these things. Other than that, we will probably, starting tomorrow, go through the web report and just close out all those sections, and then start working on the one-times. But we have a couple weeks. Other than that, but however the VA works out, so if the VA miraculously gets passed, we've already kind of, that's baked into this, but if it doesn't, we'll have to take all that and put it in here, or the parts that we want to put in here. So that could cause us to have to restructure it. Any questions, comments?
So are we gonna look at the bills that we've sent out of here that have?
Yeah, they'll be on the list with the documents.
Yeah, okay.